Welcome two people who are eminent in their own fields. Since I believe in the ladies first principle, I'll first introduce the comely young lady from Delhi, Richa Lakhera. She specializes in writing and presenting TV programs related to Bollywood. She will ask questions later, a few minutes later, to Farrukh Dhondy on his contribution or connection to Bollywood or to the Indian cinema. Introducing Farrukh Dhondy is a more difficult and challenging assignment, for he's a man of many facets. He is a brilliant and prolific writer. Not all prolific writers are brilliant. I am neither. But anyway, he's a brilliant writer who writes on a wide variety of subjects. He writes columns, he writes best-selling novels, memorable short stories, he writes scripts for film, he writes plays, and what else? He writes a lot more. And he writes film scripts both for the West as also for Bollywood. And he writes, as I said, columns for UK papers and also for Indian newspapers. So, in short, he's a man who wears different hats. Each hat fits him more than the other. Now, my first question to you, Farrukh, is which is the hat you enjoy wearing the most?
Well, basically, if you say that I wear a lot of hats, I don't wear any hats at all because hats give me a headache. And one writes different sorts of things because different people pay me to write different things. And as a professional writer, I'm not saying that I have a passion for film writing. I do it because somebody wants a script and wants to pay me for it. Good. I write a novel because something is brewing inside me and I want to get it out and get paid for it. So if you're a professional writer, that's what you do. What would I have liked? Which hat I would have liked to wear? I'd have liked to be a professional footballer and earn the kind of money that they earn. But unfortunately, I trip over my own feet when I run and I can't do that. So I resort to writing different sorts of things instead.
The bad news is that our friend Farrukh Dhondy's latest translation, collection of latest translation of Rumi's poetry has sold out. But the good news is that our friend Richa's debut novel is on sale. She has agreed to write, to sign it for you. It's called Garbage Beat. And her second novel is Item Girl, and many more, or at least two more, are in the pipeline. My second question to you is, in the preface to your volume of, or rather the collection of your translation of Rumi, you quoted a Russian poet. You quoted a Russian poet. The comment may be a little sexist, so for that you will have to apologize to the ladies if they get angry. But it is interesting. It says that translations are like women. The ones that are beautiful are not necessarily faithful, or rather rarely faithful, and those that are faithful are not necessarily or not always beautiful. So I have read your translation. I enjoyed reading it. I have not read the original, but I can feel that it is beautiful. But how unfaithful is it?
What translating a Sufi poet is into English is quite difficult, and the difficulty is that you have to have a Sufi sensibility in order to know what this relationship to the divine in life and to the idea of losing consciousness and being in a trance is to particularly to Rumi. And once you absorb that kind of idea intellectually, because I don't feel it, I'm fairly atheistic. I'm a good Zoroastrian atheist. But to try and understand the Sufi sensibility is the first task. And then to try and translate a universe of metaphors, you know, roses, cups of wine, divine love, and so forth, into into English prose, into modern English verse is quite difficult. And so I would say that I haven't translated it literally because literal translations of Rumi or any other Sufi poet, or in fact modern Urdu poetry even, won't make much sense. And the people who've done it, such as Coleman Barks and Deepak Chopra and whatnot, I was very disappointed with their translations, and therefore went, because I'm no poet, therefore went into trying to translate Rumi into iambic pentameter and rhyming verse in the quatrains and so forth. So I would say it's a recreation of Rumi rather than a literal translation. And the books are going to be available tomorrow, I am told.
So you, so you feel that Edward Fitzgerald, who wrote the Rubaiyat
Yes.
of Umar Khayyam,
Yeah.
his translation, his reputation rests largely on his translation, and yet there are some hardcore translators who believe in accuracy and authenticity. They feel that it is Fitzgerald and not Umar Khayyam. You agree with that?
Yes, I agree with that totally, because I speak to people who read Persian and read it very fluently. And I told this story yesterday when I was reading my Rumi, but my great grandfather was called Jamsetji Saklatwala. And the one thing I remember, the story that is passed down in the family is that he used to live in Baikala and Bombay in a Parsi joint family, and got pretty fed up of his wife and his kids and the relatives and people who lived around. So every morning he'd wake up and look at the Parsi papers to see who died. And then he'd go to the funerals, because in a Parsi funeral the men sit outside and are not bothered with the prayers or the dead bodies. So whether he knew the person or not, he'd turn up at the funeral and do his Persian translations of Umar Khayyam. And he published a book of Umar Khayyam's, which a couple of copies remain in the family, I think. I've got one. And he says there that Edward Fitzgerald is all very well, but is not accurate. And he is going to do a more accurate translation. Of course, he didn't think of any beauty. Now, my great-grandfather's translation is not very good. It's not very beautiful. It's not readable. It hasn't survived. Whereas Edward Fitzgerald's Rubaiyat of Umar Khayyam, however inaccurate, is one of the great poems of the English language.
Okay, now I read a review of your latest book, London Company. It's about the period when it's a novel based on your experiences when you went to England in the 60s with your girlfriend Natasha, and you didn't get a place to stay. Even some pubs were forbidden. So please tell us about that, and also tell us what is now the difference in the UK from the time that you went there in the 60s?
Well, I went to the UK to study. And if you go to Cambridge University, as I did, you don't notice which other Indians are in town, as it were. The only other people I met there were Rajiv Gandhi and, other fellows who were studying at the same time at the university. It was only when you get kicked out of the university, you finish your studies and the porters tell you empty your rooms and bugger off. You get down to London and or Manchester or Liverpool or wherever you're going, you're looking for a job or looking for a room, that you notice that there are South Asian immigrants in Britain, and you notice that they're of a different they've come to Britain for different reasons. I went from London, I was offered a postgraduate scholarship in Leicester, and I went up there, but my girlfriend and I at the time had very little money. I was doing a thesis on Rudyard Kipling, and my girlfriend at the time, later on my wife, was working at the gas board, and we used to pay £2, 12 shillings for a room under the staircase in a place, and we had no money to spend on, not much on food or drink or whatnot. But on Friday evenings, we would turn up at the pub. It was called the Pack Horse, but it was right in the Indian ghetto, because we couldn't get a room in the English part of town, if you know what I mean. So it was called the Narborough Road in Leicester, and of course, because it used to fill up with Asians, the Pack Horse was known in town as the Packy Horse, and we used to turn up there on Friday just to drink half a pint of bitter, which is all we could afford, and then walk out again. One day we turned up on Friday evening when she got paid, and there was a whole heap of Punjabi workers sitting around drinking 4 or 5 pints of beer each. And because Mala was dressed in a shalwar kameez, that was her name, they went up to her and said, "Are you Indian?" And said, "Yes, we're both Indians. What are you doing?" And we told them, and then they bought us 16 pints of drink. And every Friday we would turn up there because they called us, and it was their payday, you see, so they'd gather there on Fridays. After the pubs closed, they knew the landlord, so they'd stay till 2 o'clock in the morning, and then we'd push off to their houses, to a fellow's house he was called Harmohan Singh, but he was known in England as Homohan Singh. So we used to go to Homohan's house, and his wife and mother-in-law would be woken up to make sarson ka saag and makki roti and so forth. And we'd have a party till 6 o'clock in the morning there. And soon we found on one Friday evening that they were in an extremely despondent state, the whole gang of them. And said, what's the problem? And they said, 5 of us have been thrown out of a typewriter factory in which they used to work. We've been made redundant for cheeking the I said, "Don't you have a union?" So they said, "No, we don't have a union. The union won't let us in." So we said, "Well, you have to organize something. How many of you are there in the factory?" And they said, "There are about 400 Asian workers." I said, "Why don't you distribute a leaflet at the gates? Tell them 5 of us have been thrown out. It could happen to them." So they said, "We don't know how to write a leaflet." So I, with my partner, then got together. We wrote a leaflet for them all night, duplicated it, stood outside the gates, and began a political movement. Soon we had, of course, the strike succeeded. It succeeded to such an extent that they decided to form the Leicester Indian Workers Association. And having formed the Indian Workers Association, they made us, because we weren't workers and students, honorary secretaries of the association. And from the honorary secretaryship, there were some of them who were very socialist minded, and they said, "Let's do something else." So the next thing we did was we desegregated a pub. There was a pub which wouldn't allow Asians in. They wouldn't serve you. You turn up there and they'd ignore you. You'd stand at the bar for half an hour, they wouldn't serve you a drink. So we said we're going to deal with these guys. Upstairs from the pub, there was an organization at the time called the National Front. They were the British fascist party who wanted to throw all immigrants out. And so we said, okay, we can't do this on our own. We got the Students' Union of Leicester University, of which I was a part, involved. And they said, we will pretend to be part of the National Front membership, come to listen to their lectures upstairs, and you guys, one or two of you, sit downstairs and wait to be served. And when you're not served, we'll come downstairs and make a ruckus while they're having a party. Of course, the word spread right through the Leicester Indian Workers Association. And by the time 2 or 3 of us had gathered, about 50 or 100 Asians turned up. And obviously the landlord knew that something very strange was going on here. The students started throwing benches and chairs and broke up the National Front meeting. And the landlord said, look, we'll serve anyone. We just want to take your money, right? So the police were called. The furniture was smashed up by that time, but it desegregated the pub. And one more episode.
Well,
then there was it was 68, and a politician called Enoch Powell made a speech saying the rivers of blood will flow because the Asians are here, this and the other. And of course, we had to protest against Enoch Powell talking nonsense. And at the same time, the Kenyan Asians were being not admitted to Britain by James Callaghan. James Callaghan was the Home Secretary. So we said, okay, let's get people from Birmingham, Leicester, Loughborough, Nottingham, all the Indian Workers Associations together. And we ganged together and said, let's get 20,000 people on the streets of Birmingham to protest against Enoch Powell's nonsense and James Callaghan's racist views. We turned up on the day, 5:30 in the morning to motor to Birmingham. We turned up there. There were 20,000 people there, Indian Workers Associations from Birmingham, from Nottingham and so on, and they all had their banners. The problem with the banners was they were all misspelt. They were spelling Callaghan as Chalaghan, which is I suppose the Punjabi pronunciation. And so we marched down the streets of Birmingham shouting "In a Kapole, hi hi," and Chalaghan, hi hi. And I don't suppose the people who were listening, the citizens, good citizens of Birmingham, understood what the hell we were talking about. And I don't suppose at the time it assisted Enoch Powell's fall. He fell by himself. Callaghan moved on, became Prime Minister, and that was how effective we were. And the Indian Workers Association flourished and fought over Bhangra costumes and so forth. And so it went on. So but we left Leicester, came to London, joined other movements, and that's what the book is about.
So just 1.5 more question before I hand you over to the young lady, which I think you'll welcome. My question is, how come Jinnah, the script that you wrote, that film produced by Akbar S. Ahmed and directed by Jamil Delvi, that neither satisfied the critics nor was it a commercial failure? What went wrong?
That it was a commercial failure is attributed to the fact that it was never distributed. And I don't know which critics wrote about it, because I don't know which critics saw it, because it has only been seen in private releases and possibly pirated in different versions on video or something. But the story of Jinnah is strange. I was not initially supposed to tell it at all, but I feel now free to so do, because what happened was Jamil Delvi, a friend of mine, director, Pakistani director, and Akbar Ahmed, who was also at Cambridge with me at the same time, They both approached me and said, "Will you write the autobiography? The story, the biography of Jinnah in some sense." I said, "Well, it shouldn't be a biography; it should be a film." And a film has a structure, a story structure. They said, "Okay, make up a story structure." And I said, "Look, I'm out of sympathy with the Qaid-e-Azam, and you want somebody else, you know." So they said, "No, no, we absolutely want you. Why don't you read some books and get in sympathy?" So I read Stanley Walport's biography and 3 or 4 others, 1 or 2 Pakistani ones. And I said, "Okay, I'm ready to write the film, how much?" And Akbar Ahmed quoted a price, and I said, "Okay, that's fine." And they said, "Mainly, you won't have your name on it." So I said, "That's fine, I understand." They said, "1, you're not Pakistani, you know. 2, you're not a Muslim. 3, you've got a bad reputation as a socialist of some sort. And we don't, we can't publicize it. So we will say on the film, written by Akbar Ahmed and Jamil Dehlavi." I said, "Say what you like as long as you pay me," right? And so I wrote the film. They raised the money. They made the film, and they showed it privately at the National Film Theatre in London. And of course, I went to see it with a couple of friends, and I went up to Akbar and said, "Fantastic script, boy, it's very nice, it's good." And it went off okay. And then for some reason, nothing to do with me, Akbar and Jamil fell out. Director and producer had a massive fight over finances, and Jamil actually took Akbar to court. And yeah, so there in the Strand courts, the newspaper started writing about this dispute. They called me to be a witness. Now, if a court subpoenas you to be a witness in Britain, you have to go. And the other thing you can't do in a British court, unless you want to be jailed, is perjure yourself. You can't lie. So the magistrate was conducting, the judge in the Strand courts was conducting the thing, and he said, the Guardian says, "You wrote Jinnah. Did you write Jinnah?" And I couldn't say no. I broke my promise to keep quiet. I said, "Yes, I did write Jinnah." At which point, the Pakistani newspapers began calling me up and saying, you wrote Jinnah." By that time, it was all public knowledge, and they said, "Okay." Yeah, they wrote about it here, I believe. And one newspaper asked me, "What comment do you have to make?" So I said, "Well, General Musharraf has given Akbar Ahmed the High Commissionership of Britain on the strength, they say, of him having written Jinnah. Now, if you want me to be ambassador to Tahiti, I'll take that on, and I'll look after Pakistan's interests after I've looked after some of my own." They actually took it seriously and published that.
So
they
were not entirely correct in saying that you had no relation with Jinnah because you're not a Muslim, you're not a Pakistani, but you were one of his in-laws being a Parsi, so that makes a difference. And you have one final question. You have written for the Western, or more specifically UK film industry.
Yes.
And you've written for Bollywood. They are two very different genres. So do you switch off one part of the brain when you write about Bollywood, for Bollywood, and you switch off the other when you write for UK, for Channel 4? And this question, and then the lady takes over.
Well, even though neuroscientists will say that my brain is partitioned, I've never felt it partitioned. My right hand sometimes doesn't know what my left hand is doing, but I feel a fairly integrated headset. But you are quite right, but writing for Bollywood is very different from writing in the Western tradition. And I'll tell you why. Because Bollywood's entire output is based on the ethics and the mythology of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata and other such, such traditional epic things. So, for instance, you can't, you can't have a look at reality. The Bollywood audience doesn't want it. You have to make a moral fable out of it, right? If there is a Mother India has to prefer the teachings of Vedanta and the truth to loyalty to her son. If an American was making the same film, I think the loyalty to the son would be a hell of a dilemma. And that would be the focus of the moral decision that the character has to take. The moral decisions that are taken in Bollywood films have to be according to, shall we say, the scriptures. I'll give you a brief example. Take somebody like Meera Nair. People say, she writes a film called Monsoon Wedding. I don't know if you've seen the film, but Monsoon Wedding is set in India around a Punjabi wedding. Now, it has three themes. One, it has a love theme. A contractor fellow who's setting up a shamiana falls in love with the Goani's ayah, and he says, I love you, and takes her flowers. That could happen anywhere. Good, corny Bollywood theme, right? Number two, the girl who's being married, and the bridegroom and the families and all are in place, and there's going to be a party and a wedding the next day. She is called by her current boyfriend, secretly, a television wala, and she goes off in the night and is caught by the police having sex with him in a car. She comes back and tells her friend, the police are going to expose this. I am going to go to my husband-to-be and tell him what has happened. And she says, are you crazy? If he knows that you're not a virgin, he won't marry you, blah. And it'll be a scandal. And she said, well, I have to live honestly and I'll do that. I'm summarizing for you. And she goes and tells him, and he says, well, okay, I'm not a virgin either. And if it won't happen and if we love each other from tomorrow forever, that's fine with me. It could never happen in a Bollywood film. No girl is going to be in that predicament as a character. It won't be allowed. No producer will do it. No director will do it. Nobody will. That kind of plot does not happen. It's too real. Third plot in Monsoon Wedding is a young girl, 18-year-old girl, a dependent of the family because her parents are dead. She's an orphan. She says to the head of the family, Mamaji, Kakaji, whoever he is, he's the head of the family, he's turned up for the wedding, and he takes a little girl, 3-year-old girl, and says, come, I'll give you some sweeties. And this 18-year-old says, stop this child going with this man. So they say, what are you talking about? And she says, when I was a child, he abused me sexually, right? So the head of the family of an Indian family, at a wedding, is being accused by the orphan of the family of child abuse. It could not happen in a Bollywood film. It can only happen in a Meera Nair's film, and that's why it doesn't make that much money in India. It works in America. It works for the Oscars. It works for Cannes. It works for Venice and Berlin and London. It doesn't fly in Delhi or Bombay.
So I guess I can take over now. Farrukh has also done two very important Bollywood films. One was The Bandit Queen and the other was Mangal Pandey, The Rising. And I had the pleasure of interviewing him before in India for that. What I want to ask, of course, I'll ask you about the films, but what I really want to know first is it true that you still play Scrabble with Indian air hostesses and they beat you at it?
Well, I suppose you got that from one of my columns. I had nothing to write that week, so I recollected that incident. What happened was I was very innocently with these two air hostesses in Bombay, and we had a bottle of whiskey or something with us, but it started monsoon raining, and I couldn't get out. My car was flooded, and we had to stay there. And so we cooked some food and had some brandy and whatnot. And they said, "How are we going to entertain ourselves?" And obviously, some things are out of the question. So we played Scrabble instead. And I thought, what are these girls going to do? You know, Scrabble. I'm a writer. I speak English perfectly, I think. And they brought out some wretched Scrabble dictionary and put it by the board. And they started constructing all these extremely strange words, you know, ZOPLZ. I said, hang on, that's not a word. They said, yes, it is. And they opened up the Scrabble dictionary, and there it was in the Scrabble dictionary. And before long, you know, by half an hour, 1 hour, I was losing extremely badly. They were making triple word scores and double word scores. I said, how do you do all this? I said, we have nothing to do when we go to New York or London or Hong Kong or wherever, and we play Scrabble, and we are perfect at it. In fact, we are thinking of entering the World Scrabble Championships. After that, I didn't feel bad about it.
Your book, Bikini Murders,
Yes.
I want to ask about that in the sense Charles Shobraj, on whom the book is based, sort of got annoyed with you. He's really offended. He says that you ruined his reputation. And do you think he's also angry because you sort of named the book The Bikini Murders and not the life and times of Charles Shobraj?
Well, I don't know if anybody here knows who Charles Shobraj is, but Charles Shobraj is a serial murderer who killed a lot of people in the 60s and 70s, mainly in Bangkok and in India and in Nepal. Probably more than 40 people he put to death. And he is now in serving a life sentence for murder in Kathmandu prison in Nepal, because he turned up there for his own reasons, which I've explained in my book, The Bikini Murders, which is a novel based loosely on his life. And what he said to me was, when you launch a book, television stations call you to talk. And so I was in Bombay, and Times Now, a television station, called me to speak about my book, and I thought, innocently enough, that fine, they'll say it'll help some sales, and that's fine. So I went and sat and talked to Mr. Arnab Goswami, who was the presenter, and he said, "Oh, we've got a little surprise for you." And the cameras turn up, and there's Charlie in the Kathmandu jail behind bars saying, "I'm going to sue you, you know, if you publish this book, I'm going to catch you and this and that, and you are just a middleman and this and that." And I said, "What do you mean by a middleman? If you want to call me a pimp, do so. Because if Nelson Mandela called me a pimp, I might be disturbed, but you can say what you like." And then Goswami, the presenter, says to me, I thought I was going to publicize my book. He says, it was good publicity anyway. He says, "I've got another surprise for you." And they go to Paris, and they've got this Charles Shobraj is a lawyer, a lady sitting there saying, "Mr. Dhondy, better watch it." I'm not going to do her French accent. He'd better watch it. If he steps foot in Paris or in London and publishes this Bikini Murders there, we're going to sue him for everything he's got. And the publishers better watch out and not publish it, blah, blah. And I said to Goswami, I said, "Do you know who this woman is? She is married to the Jackal, that Carlos the Jackal, who's in jail for murder in Paris. And she also was on the team that defended Milosevic. She was also an advisor to Saddam Hussein's team, right? And now she is defending Charles Shobraj and saying he hasn't murdered anybody, right? What are you going to sue me for? Libel? What I have supposedly ruined the reputation of a man who is in murder, for multiple murders for life. I don't think there's any reputation to ruin, so forget it, right? And of course, they did forget it. Nobody sued me so far.
And you've sold the rights of your book, The Bikini Murders, to Anurag in India. But what I want to ask you is, who do you see amongst the Bollywood stars? Because I heard, I don't know, I think I read it in one of your interviews that perhaps you want to see maybe Amir Khan or one of the other Khans or someone. Who would you really like to see, or amongst the new crop of the Bollywood stars, as Charles Shobraj, the bikini murderer?
You're asking a question from a writer. Writers have absolutely no power in appointing anybody, so you don't even think about which star would play this, that, or the other. They have, a writer is not even welcome on the set. You're as welcome as a one-legged man at an ass-kicking contest. It's not. They don't want you there. There's an old joke in Britain that the Irish actress slept with the writer instead of the producer or director, because they choose the actress. But Amir would do a damn good job if the age of the film permitted him to. But I'm not writing the script. It depends on, I suppose, the firm to which I've sold the film and the writer there. I don't want to engage with the Charles Shobraj story any further, except as a second edition of the Bikini Murders.
Right. Mira's current film, you were just talking about it, The Reluctant Fundamentalist.
Yes.
It, of course, deals with the Muslims in America after the post 9/11, and we had a very a super hit Bollywood film. You would have heard of it. It was Shah Rukh Khan's film, which also deals with a Muslim in America post 9/11. It was called My Name is Khan and I'm Not a Terrorist. What I want to ask you is, of course, there are two totally different sort of films. They are two opposite ends of the spectrum. There are obvious differences. They are meant for different, audiences. Yeah. But at the end of the day, the Shah Rukh Khan film, with the Bollywood gene code intact and everything, reached more people, not just in India, in Pakistan, Bangladesh, Africa, Mauritius, or across the world. So would you say that the basic Bollywood gene code is good for commerce?
It's good for commerce in Bollywood, in India, in Pakistan. People used to say that Raj Kapoor and Nargis won all these prizes internationally and whatnot. They only won prizes in that part of the Soviet Union which was still largely peasantry. In Tashkent and in Kazakhstan and so forth. They didn't win prizes in St. Petersburg. But because the consciousness of the populations is different, I'll be very brief and people can criticize that. What happens in Western art is that Western art is used to criticize the society. Right. Western novels were born through a crisis of the Christian faith. Because faith was failing, Tennyson writes in memoriam, because one doesn't go to the Bible to tell you how to live, you start believing that somebody else, in describing human stories, has to indicate the possibilities of love, of life, of existence, of generosity, of kindness. What are these things? They don't come from the Bible. They now have to come from George Eliot and Jane Austen and Dickens and Tolstoy and Flaubert and so on. So the crisis of faith produced the novel, produced drama. You can go back as far as Shakespeare. It will tell you how to behave. Shakespeare very conscientiously, and that's where it begins in the Renaissance, leaves out biblical direction for how to behave. And Bollywood doesn't. Bollywood films don't use art to criticize society. They use art to reaffirm some values of society. Western art constantly uses it to criticize, to get you to realize something. Bollywood's film, My Name is Khan, think about it. It's not the story of Muslims being in America. The film I would choose for that is another of Mira's films, which is called The Namesake. Now, that film is about the immigrant experience of America. Shah Rukh Khan's film, My Name is Khan, is an affirmation of course, it says, My name is Khan, I'm not a terrorist. That's what he wants to tell the president. That's his goal in the film. But the film is really about a man with a particular mental disorder and how he is in love with a woman, and that's pure Bollywood values. How tragedy overtakes that relationship and so on. It's not really to do with that cutting edge experience of the immigrant in America, and that's why it's popular. It's a love story.
You also said that, of course, in India we have Bollywood, which is the closest we have to popular
Somebody's asking something.
culture. And yeah, he wants to ask something right now.
I don't
Can we just?
It's up to him.
No,
I don't know. He's raising his hand. Yeah.
We'll do the question answer after that. We'll get your chance.
Yeah.
She'll ask one question more,
I have two.
and there'll be
Go on.
and there'll be we'll entertain 3 questions later from the audience, because I can see my friend Irfan Hussain, the author of a highly readable book, Fatal Fault Line. He is sharpening his knife because he's supposed to conduct the next session. So your question.
Sure. Of course, in India, Bollywood is the closest we have to acceptable culture, so to speak, very acceptable in popular culture. Once you had said that in India, a lot of course, on the other side you have your art films, and I remember, I don't know if. Of course, you said it, that a lot of art films in India are trying to depict reality on behalf of others. You use the word, you coined the word behalfist films. Which film are you talking about, and why would you say that?
What happened with art films is that people began to say, I don't want to do the Bollywood thing. I want to help society. I want to be a political propagandist of some sort. And so they would look for people who had a problem. And it has a long tradition. It comes from the Gandhian tradition way back, when people made films like in the 20s and 30s, they made films like Achut Kanya, which was to do with untouchability, or Razia Begum, which was to do with the feminist question at the time. So what they started to do in art films or in minority films, the directors who said, we don't want to be like Bollywood, reacting against it, they said, what we'll do is we'll pick up an issue and we'll make a film out of an issue on behalf of somebody else. Of course, all those people, they live lives of Bollywood directors. They don't live the life of the weavers about whom they're talking. That's why I coined the word behalfist, because they were making films on behalf of somebody else.
One more question, if I had the time, can I just ask? One more question I'd like to ask you is, Bollywood is seen as a self-sufficient industry. We have we have this chain of commerce which is there, and they're very happy in Bollywood. They're earning their money and everything. And so, is there a sort of a mutual conspiracy of incompetence to keep the bar really, really low, because no one wants to disturb that chain, because you already have an audience. So you want to try something new. And I was speaking to Jaideep Sahani, who made Chak De, whose work sort of you had admired, and he sort of told me that problem ये है कि हर producer at the end of the day says कि एक एकदम नई film दो, original idea, लेकिन शोले जैसी हो. So no one really wants. So what happens is the audience is getting, it's also, perhaps the audience also wants to see the same sort of stuff.
Well, the majority of the audience wants to see the same sort of stuff. But if you study Indian films, as you do, because you're an expert on it just now, things are changing rather fast.
course.
for the reason that the audience is getting more diverse. There are very many more people who can sustain a film that is based on observation. So, if you notice, the production house that Amir Khan is set out to make, because he's producing films as well as directing them, as well as acting in them, has set out to do a new kind of film, and that film is not based on the old formula of Bollywood. It's going in a direction of comedy mostly. So far, nobody's tried very serious films on that score, but one or two. Or Pipli is a comedy also. They're going in different directions from Hollywood because there is an audience that can now sustain it. But if you think of Bollywood as a great studio monolith, forget it. Bollywood is by and large smoke and mirrors because it has no studio system of its own. Nobody, and I know this from personal experience, no producer invests their own money in a film. They might believe in the film, and then they'll go out and look for money from capitalists somewhere, from money lenders, from banks, from this, from that, or from foreign companies even. They don't put their own money in it. So even if it loses, even if Bollywood goes bust, it's not them that will go bust. It's directors and producers become brokers in the Bollywood industry. The real people taking the rap are distributors and people who put up the money, mostly,
Business.
redundant money from business houses. Yes.
Thank you, Richa. And I saw a hand raised 3/4. Yes. So the first question is from a lady who is now looking sideways. I don't know why. What was the question? Yes. Okay, you.
Basically, I haven't seen your translation of Rumi, but whatever you said and what I got from that, you talked about the difficulty of translating Sufi poetry, and you also said that Sufis have used metaphors. Now, basically, Sufis haven't used metaphors.
Sorry?
Sufis
Sufis
haven't
what?
used metaphors at all. Sufis have their own language. There is a different Sufi lexicon that is present in all the Oriental languages. You have to go through a Sufi lexicography, that is another art. You have few Sufi dictionaries which are prevalent in Arabic and Persian only, not in Urdu, Sindhi or other Oriental languages. Another thing you said, to translate a Sufi poetry, one must go in trance, because Sufis were in trance when they composed the verses.
No, I didn't say that. I said one ought to understand what they're talking about.
But a notion that has been preached by Orientalists that Sufis were in trance and they had nothing to do with the consciousness. Now, basically, they become unconscious while composing the pieces of the poetry. But actually, there's no trance in the Sufi way. Sufis are the people of super consciousness. They are beyond our normal conscious levels. Okay, so these notions must be corrected. Another thing is, unfortunately, the people who have been translating the Sufis are not Sufis themselves.
Thank you, but that's not the question. That's a statement.
Thank you.
Any question, please? Any question?
Yes, I heard you yesterday and I heard you today, and you're supremely interesting, entertaining, good writer and good commentary, Mr. Dhondy. And my only question is that can we have another session with you? Because we piled up, a whole bunch of young people had passed and they belong to my family. A lot of questions to be put up today now, but I can see I'm too late at that. So can we have a little side session with you for a bunch of youngsters? I'm asking it over the stage.
I'm yours.
So find some time.
Anytime.
Well,
Thank you.
we can't.
I've diverted my question. There's no time. Thank you.
So we have to vacate the stage, you see. You can take him to the tea room or someplace. Any more question? Gee, what's the question? No more question, it seems. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hang on.
Acha, okay.
Did you acquire your radical views from Sir Shapurji Saklatwala? Was he in any way related to you, the first communist MP?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, he was my great-grandfather's cousin, and they used to live together. And Sachs, as he was known in North Battersea, where he was the first communist, he was a close relative. So,
And
did I get anything from him? Yes, I got the ideas, some of the ideas of socialism in his time. But I didn't follow them exactly because it was a very different kind of. He was a member of the ILP, Independent Liberal Party, Labour Party.
And was there a formation in the International Brigade called after him in Spain?
I'm not aware that the International Brigade was named after
There was
him.
a formation.
Because by the time the International Brigade started up, in Franco's time, he'd finished with England and finished as an MP and come back to India and was helping the Tatars make Jamshedpur.
That was quite a transformation.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Farrukh. I can see that the percentage of Parsis in your audience is much more than the percentage of Parsis in India and Pakistan. But having said that, you have a large number of non-Parsi admirers. And thank you, Richa, for joining us.
Thank you.